Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of my channel. I'm a history teacher when COVID-19 isn't a thing, and I want to try to do my part in building the liberty movement. While I am a registered libertarian, you don't have to be involved with the party to support liberty. We will talk about all kinds of things on this channel, from current events to history topics that interest me. And let's be honest, all of history interests me. Okay, so let's answer this question right off the bat. What is libertarianism? It is the idea that individuals are the basis for any society. We all make choices and are therefore responsible for our own actions. It is through this that all other things flow. Libertarianism is both a complex and simple philosophy that can be best described as consisting of individual rights, spontaneous order and the rule of law, limited government, free markets, and peace. Let's first begin with individual rights. The political philosophers of the Enlightenment and even later period advocated strongly for the rights of man. John Locke and Thomas Jefferson were perhaps some of the greatest. They argued that the individual is the basis for a just society. We all have choices and are responsible for our own actions, whether they be good or bad. We possess rights and responsibilities to both ourselves and our fellow human beings. Specifically, we are moral agents who have basic rights to be secure in our life, liberty, and property. Rights are not granted by the government. Instead, they exist because we, as human beings, exist. This was cemented in the Declaration of Human Rights for all nations around the world after the Second World War. The only reason why government exists, according to these thinkers, is to protect the rights of their citizens against the abuses of foreign elements, mainly the imperial and monarchical powers of the late 18th century. Today, these foreign elements would be dictatorships or authoritarian regimes who attempt to assert their dominance over others. If the government should ever wish to take away these rights, the burden of proof lies with them. They need to be able to explain why a certain right should be limited. If people believe this to be an excess of power by the government, it is then their duty to oppose them to ensure that the flame of liberty is not extinguished. Spontaneous order and the rule of law is necessary for any society to survive. However, it is often misinterpreted as having must be imposed by a central authority. Before the advent of government thousands of years ago, people coexisted peacefully without any need for law. Libertarians often get a bad rap for wanting to return to this style of life and live in extreme freedom, but that is not the case. Instead, libertarians argue that order arises on its own when people come together to achieve a common purpose, whether that be to make money, create a language, or respect one another's property. I could go on, but if I did, I would be here all day. We, as individuals, are free to pursue our own self-interest so long as they do not infringe upon the rights of others. Laws in a just and free society are to be set up as boundaries for individuals not to cross, not to create arbitrary commands. Law should protect the freedoms of individuals so they can pursue happiness in their own way. Examples of this include, but are not limited to, owning a firearm, growing your own marijuana, or marrying a same-sex partner. People should be free to create their own lives, and laws should not aim to admit a certain outcome or result. As Thomas Jefferson once said in his memoirs, no man has a natural right to commit aggression on the equal rights of another, and this is all from which the laws ought to restrain him. Limited government is an ideal Jefferson actively promoted and libertarians campaign for today. Governments are created to protect the rights of its citizens, not impose arbitrary ideas on them. Libertarians want to limit the power and scope of government as much as possible. The founders of the United States thought in a similar way, as they divided the powers amongst three branches. We can argue whether or not that still rings true to this day, but that is a discussion for another time. The separations of power is cemented in a written constitution. If this is all sounding familiar and akin to your high school civics class, you wouldn't be far off. It is perhaps my favorite thing in the world to teach. Libertarianism, then, is the modern incarnation of what many of the founding fathers were called, liberals, or today, classical liberals. The term today has been hijacked to mean left-leaning or perhaps even progressive, just like conservatism has been hijacked. Libertarians are neither liberal nor conservative. Whereas these two groups in American politics today pick and choose libertarian principles to best fit their voter base, libertarians have been consistent with their beliefs throughout time. Whether it was Ron Paul fighting to end the Federal Reserve or Barry Goldwater advocating for civil rights, you will see a consistent emphasis on the policy of liberty throughout. Free markets are one of the main ways to promote liberty throughout a just and open society. The idea of a free market has been a godsend to the entire world. According to an article written by Stephen Horowitz at the Foundation for Economic Education, free markets have resulted in a worldwide reduction in poverty, infant and child mortality rates, and an increase in life expectancy by almost 120%, and that's just from 1990. This flows from the idea of the right to own property, and that doesn't just mean land. The right to voluntarily exchange goods and services through mutual agreement is part and parcel of this ideal of liberty. The idea of free markets first emerged in the late 18th century, made most famous by Adam Smith in his Wealth of Nations. Frederick Bastiat continued the work from the earlier thinkers, being one of the first pioneers in the Austrian School of Economics. It was an idea meant to combat the control of the economy by the European despots and absolute monarchists who sought to live off the production of their respective peoples. Creating a class system before the emergence of communism, it was the pre-Marxist way to combat the difference between the haves and the have-nots. Classical liberals and libertarians today seek to defend the rights of individuals to keep what they earn, both in production and in potential revenue. In a free market system, you as the consumer have the ability to pick and choose who you do business with. A common argument against free markets and capitalism is what happens when large corporations monopolize and control a majority of vested interest. What happens if they abuse their workers and charge exorbitant prices for common everyday goods? The answer to this is quite simple. The market will correct itself. Opponents are warranted to point out this concern, but over time the people will not buy those goods from those firms, aka those companies and corporations, and as a result, they will lose profits. Business is all about making money, and once they realize they could be making so much more if they adapted, the economy will change. You as the consumer have the freedom of choice. Libertarians want this because it has been proven time and again it is the natural state of people when the state is not involved to thrive and prosper when left to their own devices. Most wars usually arise because the state determines itself to be economically inadequate to a neighbor or another group. It brings out the worst in human beings, creating a them versus us mentality that is dangerous to fall into. This can also creep into society itself and does not have to include open warfare. These social and economic conflicts that we are seeing today arise because of what myself and others describe as tribalism. Again, it's a them versus us mentality. The powerful and well-off are not affected by this conflict. The little guy, who a majority of us are, free individuals have always had to defend themselves against aggressors, but that is the key philosophy of libertarian thought, the idea of self-defense and non-aggression. As David Boaz states in his book, The Libertarian Mind, war is the enemy of the peaceful, productive people on all sides of a conflict. Liberty is the most important value to libertarians and many others in society. I often make the remark that if given the opportunity, many people would largely agree with the principles and philosophies of libertarianism, but they are either unaware or believe it can never work in our current political climate. Liberty-minded folk strive for a more pluralistic and free society where all groups of individuals, no matter your political affiliation, race, religion, gender, or other category, can come together to pursue their own self-interest and through this help one another. But that is the key part, helping one another through individualism. If you do this, you are then free to pursue your own way of life. Experiment. Try something new and unfamiliar. Ask yourself questions like, how can this be made better? And how can I make something entirely new? Libertarians believe themselves to be the heirs of the Enlightenment and wish to hold the government to the same standard as all of those thinkers did, from John Locke to Mary Wollstonecraft. To put it in a modern sense that will hopefully encourage further discussion both in your own circles and on this channel is the recent COVID stimulus package. The bill itself was over 5,000 pages long and written by the leadership of both houses of Congress, with little input by those they are supposed to get input from. That is not how the founders intended our system to work, and it has become more akin to an oligarchy. All groups must be willing to stand side by side and tell the leaders of the United States they will no longer stand for the corruption, polarization, and oppression that only gets worse each day. America, instead, must return to the principles of self-governance if we are to truly emerge from this ever-approaching abyss. Or, as we like to call it in libertarian circles, federalism, which I hope to do a video on very soon. If we do not, we will only have ourselves to blame. I will leave you all with this quote from a personal hero of mine, Milton Friedman. A society that puts equality before freedom will get neither. A society that puts freedom before equality will get a high degree of both. Thanks everyone for watching. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I plan to be doing at least one video a week on various topics, whether they be about libertarianism, current events, or history. If you are wanting to explore more about the ideas of libertarianism, I highly recommend you check out these sources: the Cato Institute, the Foundation for Economic Education, and the Libertarian Party. If you would like to start listening to podcasts about liberty, I would highly recommend any of the shows on the We Are Libertarians network. They're the best when it comes to dipping your toes into the philosophy. Thanks again for listening, and I hope to see you all soon.